No one left the farm, a true story of shadows and silence. This story isn't mine originally, it was passed down to me by my dad's uncle, a man who'd seen more than his fair share of hardship. He told it to me once, late one evening, and I've never been able to forget it. It all happened back in the 1970s, somewhere deep in the eastern part of what used to be Yugoslavia. Now, for the sake of clarity, I'll tell it as if I were him, in his voice, from his eyes. I was raised in a quiet little town tucked away in eastern Yugoslavia. Not much ever happened there, but it's where I spent the best years of my youth. My closest friend growing up was a guy named Daniel Brooks. After we both finished our mandatory military service, Daniel inherited a sprawling piece of farmland about 60 miles from where we were born. It was way out there, seriously remote. The closest village was a solid 6 miles off, and you wouldn't just bump into anyone out there. Once Daniel moved to the farm, life took us in different directions. We hadn't seen each other face to face in 9 whole years. But we still wrote each other letters from time to time. That connection never really faded. About 2 years ago, Daniel got married. I never got the chance to meet his wife, though I always meant to. A year after the wedding, they had their first child, a little girl named Maria. I remember how proud he sounded in the letter where he told me the news. You could almost hear him smiling through the ink. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, I got another letter. But this time, it wasn't from Daniel. It was signed by his wife. She said Daniel had died. Just like that. She wrote that he fell off a horse and didn't make it. I remember staring at the page, my hands trembling, trying to take it in. She invited me to the funeral, of course, but also asked if I could come a day or two early. There was work piling up on the farm, and with Daniel gone so suddenly, she was overwhelmed. I didn't even think twice. I threw some things into a bag, grabbed my coat, and hit the road in my beat-up old car. It was late November by the time I arrived, that weird, quiet time of year when the skies stay dry, and everything feels kind of still. I got to the farm just after sunrise. There they were, waiting for me out front, Daniel's wife, little Maria bundled in her arms, and a gruff-looking stable hand standing beside them. We shared breakfast together that morning, just the 3 of us. It was warm, quiet, and a little awkward, you know, that kind of silence that comes after loss. She seemed kind, though, tired, but kind. After we ate, the stable hand took me around to show me the tasks that needed doing. The first thing we had to deal with was a leak in the roof, a decent-sized hole that let in the cold morning air. We got started patching it up, but the job was too big to finish in one go. There were too many other things that needed attention around the property. That farm had been Daniel's pride, but you could tell it hadn't been touched in weeks. The place was surrounded on all sides by dense forest, and all day long, we heard the distant crack of hunting rifles echoing through the trees. Flocks of birds would shoot up from the canopy every time, startled, chaotic. Later, I was put in charge of feeding the cattle. Then, as if that wasn't enough, I was asked to head into the woods to find mushrooms for dinner. Not that I minded, I'd grown up playing in forests just like this. The dark didn't bother me one bit. But the day dragged on. One task bled into another, and by the time the sun started setting, I was completely wiped out. At some point, I must have dozed off. When I came to, it was already around 7 in the evening. I felt terrible, genuinely embarrassed. I apologized to Daniel's wife and the stable hand for crashing like that, and told them I'd go collect the mushrooms right then. I grabbed an old flashlight and made my way toward the tree line. The forest was thick and silent, the kind of silence that presses in on you. But like I said, I wasn't afraid of it. That kind of darkness felt familiar to me. I'd known it since I was a boy. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But that night was just the beginning of something I never could have prepared for. I should have known better than to head out into unfamiliar woods after dark. But I was stubborn, and honestly, a little too confident. I figured I'd be in and out. No big deal. But the moment I crossed into that forest, I realized just how wrong I was. The trees were dense, like a wall of shadow, and the deeper I went, the less familiar everything looked. I had no idea where I was going. And the howling. God, the howling. Wolves, somewhere out in the distance. Not close enough to see, but close enough that every sound made my heart skip. Then, out of nowhere, a wild boar shot right across my path. I froze. My flashlight caught its eyes for half a second, glowing, wild, before it vanished into the brush. I thought I was done for. I must have wandered through those woods for an hour, maybe longer. I just kept walking, trying to keep calm, until finally, the beam of my flashlight hit something metallic. It was a steel fence. At first, I couldn't tell what it was, but after a few steps along the perimeter, it hit me. I was standing outside a cemetery. The gate was locked, but part of the fence had been bent open, like something, or someone, had forced their way in. So I stepped through the hole. And then I saw it, a man, standing dead still, pointing a shotgun right at me. I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat. He didn't say a word at first, just stared me down. Then, in a sharp voice, he asked who I was and what the hell I was doing there. I raised my hands and started explaining everything. I told him about the farm, about Daniel's death, how I came to help his wife out before the funeral. I tried to sound calm, but my voice was shaking. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me, studying my face. And then, finally, he lowered the gun. He introduced himself as the cemetery caretaker. Told me he kept watch over the place, especially at night. Then he motioned for me to follow him. We walked through rows of graves under that dark sky, cold air brushing my skin. Eventually, he stopped in front of a headstone. He didn't say a word. Just pointed. "Read it," he said. And when I leaned in close and read the name carved into the stone, everything inside me froze. It said, Daniel and Rebecca Brooks. I stared at it, trying to process. It made no sense. None. The caretaker looked at me, and I could see the sorrow in his eyes, the kind of grief that doesn't fade. He said Rebecca, Daniel's wife, had died during childbirth. That was a year ago. And Daniel, heartbroken beyond repair, left their baby at someone's doorstep in the next village, and then took his own life. I just stood there, shaking my head. That can't be right, I told him. I had breakfast with Rebecca yesterday. I saw their daughter. But he didn't budge. Instead, he said, "Come with me. You need to hear everything." His cabin was small, built from worn wood, the kind that creaks when the wind blows too hard. Inside, it was warm, a fire crackled in the hearth, and he poured us tea. We sat across from each other, the low light dancing over our faces, the air thick with cigarette smoke and disbelief. He told me things I wasn't ready to hear. He said I wasn't the first person to visit that farm since the Brooks family died. But the others, they never came back. People go there, he said quietly, but they don't leave. I told him nothing about this made any sense. He nodded like he'd heard that before. Then, slowly, he stood up and walked toward the fireplace. His back was to me. He didn't turn around when he spoke again. "I think someone moved into that farm after the Brooks family died," he said, his voice low. "Someone who's pretending to be them." That hit me hard. He went on to say that it hadn't just been Daniel, Rebecca, and a stable hand living there. There was also a maid, a cook, and even a guard. The cook used to visit him every morning for coffee, but after the deaths, she was never seen again. I told him only the stable hand was there now. He turned toward me, slowly, and asked, "Does the stable hand have long hair and wear glasses?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "No," I said. "He's bald. No glasses." That's when I knew, something was terribly, horribly wrong. He looked at me with an expression I'll never forget, sorrow in his eyes, like he was sorry for what I'd walked into. "There's something evil living on that farm," he said. "Whatever they're doing up there, it's not right. God only knows what goes on behind those walls. But I think they're using the names of the dead to lure in people from the past, people who trusted the Brooks family. They bring them in, and then they're gone. The old man, the cemetery guard, begged me to stay the night. Said I could crash on the cot by the fire, call the police in the morning, and just go home. Forget the whole thing. And maybe I should've. Maybe that would have been the smart thing to do. But there was a baby back at that farm. A baby who didn't belong in that nightmare, who hadn't asked for any of this. I couldn't sleep knowing she was there. Not with them. So I thanked the old man, asked for a box of matches, and told him goodbye. He looked at me like I was walking into my own grave. But I didn't care. Something bigger than fear was driving me, a gut-deep, unshakable need to get that baby out of there. I tossed the mushrooms I had gathered earlier, they didn't matter anymore, and instead began stuffing my coat with dry leaves, sticks, and a handful of spiny chestnuts I found scattered on the ground. I had a plan forming. It was risky, borderline insane, but it was all I had. By the time I got close to the farm, the moon had disappeared behind the clouds. Everything was cast in shadows. I crept through the tree line, then slid down into a cornfield just outside the property. That's when I tripped, hard. I landed flat on my back, staring up at a crooked scarecrow looming above me. Its stitched face seemed to mock me. I scrambled to my feet and kept moving. I reached the barn first. It was massive, filled with cattle, horses, and the scent of straw and manure. I eased open the stable doors, one by one, letting the animals loose. They looked confused at first, but I knew that would change soon. Then I got to work. I spread the dry leaves across the dirt floor in a thick layer and lit a match. The flames caught fast. The fire crackled, spreading faster than I expected. And that's when I started throwing in the chestnuts. Now, here's something you might not know: if you toss chestnuts into a fire, they explode. Pressure builds up inside, and they burst with sharp pops like gunshots. So I set the trap, then bolted for the other end of the farm, ducking low and keeping to the shadows. A minute later, pop. The first chestnut went off. Then another. And another. The explosions were loud. Echoing. Spreading panic like wildfire. The animals freaked. Cows lowed, chickens flapped and screamed, and the horses went wild. They broke into full gallops, charging through the open spaces, hooves pounding like thunder. And right on cue, the imposters, the fake Brooks family, burst out of the house in a frenzy. They had no idea what was happening. I could see them yelling, running in different directions, trying to get the animals under control. That was my chance. I ran straight for the house. But when I got to the front door, it was locked. Damn it. They'd locked it behind them. For a moment, I panicked, until I remembered the hole in the roof we tried fixing earlier. I sprinted to the barn, climbed up a stack of hay bales to the balcony, just as a gunshot whizzed past my ear. I dropped flat, heart slamming in my chest. They'd seen me. I had seconds. Smoke was pouring from the barn now. Flames licking the beams, climbing higher and higher. It was going to collapse soon. I forced myself up, scrambled across the balcony, and climbed onto the roof. The tiles were loose beneath my boots. One slip and I'd be done. But I made it, crawled to the broken section, slipped through the hole, and landed inside the house. I didn't waste a second. I ran upstairs, shouting the baby's name, Maria, "Maria, where are you?" until I heard a soft whimper from one of the rooms. She was in a small crib, tucked into a corner, wrapped in a blue blanket. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes wide. She didn't cry, not yet. Just stared at me like she knew I didn't belong there either, but maybe I wasn't as bad as the rest. I scooped her up in my arms and turned to run. That's when I heard the front door burst open. They were back inside. I was trapped upstairs. No way I could climb down with a baby in my arms. And they were between me and the stairs. I didn't think. I just moved. I crept down the hall and slipped into a closet on the first floor, a tiny space behind coats and dusty boxes. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. I could hear them, heavy boots thudding against the wood, muffled voices. Then they started up the stairs. I held my breath. The second they passed the closet, I slipped out, staying low, cradling Maria tight against my chest. I saw the keys, hanging on a little hook right by the stairs. So close. But then, she started to cry. A tiny sound, barely a squeak, but enough. Footsteps. Fast. Coming back down. I snatched the keys from the hook, my hands shaking like leaves in the wind. I heard footsteps, fast, heavy, thudding from the top of the stairs. I looked up, and froze. There she was. The woman. But this time, she wasn't wearing that calm, fake smile from the morning. No, now she looked like something out of a nightmare, hair wild, face twisted with rage, and in her hands, an axe. She didn't scream. She didn't say a word. She just charged. I turned and ran as fast as I could, clutching the baby tight against my chest. I could hear her footsteps right behind me, each one louder than the last. Where was the man? I didn't know. Maybe still outside. Maybe waiting. I burst through the front door, almost tripping down the steps. And then, about 30 feet ahead, I saw him. Standing still in the dark. Gun raised. He fired. Everything slowed down. I twisted my body, shielding the baby. The shot cracked through the air, but instead of pain, I heard a sharp thunk. It hit a wooden post beside me. He missed. Or maybe. I just got lucky. But luck only goes so far. He tossed the gun aside, out of bullets, and pulled out a knife. I didn't wait. I sprinted toward the car. But when I got there, I stopped cold. The tires were slashed. All 4 of them. There was no way out. So I turned and ran. Straight into the woods. The branches tore at my jacket, the baby cried in my arms, and the cold night air burned in my lungs. I didn't stop. I couldn't. And then. Headlights. Flickering through the trees, getting closer. I stumbled toward them, heart hammering. And when I saw who it was, I almost dropped to my knees in relief. It was him. The cemetery guard. He had come back for me. I yanked the passenger door open, dove inside with the baby, and slammed it shut. Just then, we saw them. Out of the smoke and flame, they came charging, the man with the knife, the woman with the axe. Their silhouettes danced against the fire, twisted and monstrous. The old man floored it. The wheels spun in the mud, then gripped, and we were gone. Behind us, the farm burned. Half the barn was already gone, swallowed by flames. The animals scattered into the woods. And the 2 of them, they just stood there, watching us vanish into the dark. We didn't stop until we hit the town. Not even for breath. By morning, we were sitting in a small rural police station, telling the whole story. Everything. The letters, the baby, the murders, the fake names, the graves. They launched an investigation. It took weeks. And what they found. It was worse than anything I could have imagined. In the basement and near the barn, they uncovered multiple shallow graves. Not just Mark and his wife. Not just the maid and the cook. There were others. Burnt bodies. Buried remains. People who had come to that farm and never left. All of them had been lured the same way, letters, just like the one I got. Pretending to be from the Jouns family. It was like a trap. But here's the part that still haunts me to this day, the two people who did this. They were never found. Not a single trace. No fingerprints, no names, no family. They vanished. It was like they never existed. Ghosts in human skin. And every now and then, late at night, I wonder if they're still out there. Looking for the next old friend to invite home. The first time I heard this story, I was just a kid. It was Christmas, and we were driving through the snow to visit some distant relatives. My uncle, Paul, yeah, the one from the story, told it to me and my cousins in the car, just as we were climbing up a hill to go sledding. He said it like it was just a memory. Like it was no big deal. But the look in his eyes. That stayed with me. And after hearing it, sledding down that hill felt a little colder than usual. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to like it.